Being a community health worker, I've had the opportunity to engage in advocacy for housing for quite a few years. So it's something that every legislative session I have generally been aware of. I love being a member of Resident Action Project, as well as keeping up with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. They've always been such great supports for advocacy as a community member, sending out bills to sign on and opportunities to really engage with our legislative representation has always been something that I found super engaging. So during the pandemic, I'd say I wasn't as engaged as I have been in years past. Like many families, I was just getting through what the pandemic was really dishing out, and trying to keep up myself on rent, as I also was helping community members connect to resources. So back in 2020, I think the pandemic had been going on for quite some time, but it was finally getting to the point where I couldn't max out my credit cards anymore, that my retirements had all been pulled from and drained. I just wasn't able to keep up on the rent for my family anymore. With the loss of income that we'd had during the pandemic, it just got to a point where there was no other resources that I could pull from, and I needed to utilize rental assistance. In 2020, I reached out to Council for the Homeless, and I, like many families, got on the rental assistance list, but with the need being so great, there was still a couple months wait from the time you got on that list to the time you could actually see that rental assistance come to your landlord. So before the pandemic and before reaching out, I'd never had a late payment. I'd always been a good tenant, and I just found myself in this position that I no longer could make those ends meet with my family. I think I was on that list for from October until the day before Christmas, or maybe 2 days before Christmas, when I finally got the call. I was getting my rental assistance, and there was nothing that was more relieving to me and my family to know that we were going to be caught up in rent, and that we didn't have to have that hanging over our head. And it was such a great feeling. Fast forward 5 days, my landlord gave me a vacate notice 5 days after receiving the check from Council for the Homeless. So that relief was fairly short-lived. And I found myself going into 2021 really panicking. I'm a mother of 2 kids. I had a junior and a senior that were busy trying to adjust already to school from home, and also adjust to the fact that they had to pack all their belongings and they had nowhere to go. With the rent, with the eviction moratorium, there wasn't a whole bunch of rentals available. Trying to get into a place was nearly impossible. We tried, we applied, and we just couldn't get into a place. So it was a kind of unique situation I found myself in. Normally, I would probably be advocating for housing issues anyway, but I found myself being faced with an eviction or a vacate notice that was really tied into House Bill 1236 and some of the parameters that it would cover. And that was something that wouldn't allow landlords to receive rental assistance and turn around and evict people the very next day, which was exactly what was happening to my family. So it was an interesting situation to be in, to be able to advocate. And it was because of, I think, Resident Action Project reaching out with one of their advocacy alerts that I was reading, because I wasn't up to date on everything like I normally would be, because I was too busy packing. I was too busy trying to get my stuff into storage because we had no place to go. So I got an action alert, and it's like, that's what's happening to me right now. That is going on today for my family. So I had the opportunity to reach out and to talk to my legislative representatives during the session. And during the session, I went from being housed when I first started reaching out to being able to testify in Olympia 1 week after we put all our stuff in storage and anything that could fit in our car. And we had boxes and we had no home to live in, but we were able to really reach out and still testify to what that experience was like for myself and for my children, and do it from remotely, which was amazing, because there would be no way that I would have been able to, in that situation, get myself to Olympia on top of trying to remain, fully employed while being unhoused, while trying to transport my kids, an hour to school because of where we had landed for that temporary stay. So that was the experience that my family had. And it wasn't short. It took us over a year to be able to get back into housing. And even with that, the lease we had to sign has a requirement that if they don't sign a new lease, my rent goes up $500 without any question if my new lease isn't offered here in May. So this is something I'm very passionate about. This is something that affects my family every day. I watched the mental health of my kids be so impacted by the lack of stability and by not knowing where they were going to be able to stay or sleep, and really being able to share your story and to tell your legislative representatives, like, I'm not just a number. I'm not just one of the families that you read about, that there is this many families. This is happening today. This is happening to my children. This is happening right now. And it gives that face to the story of what's going on. I think it's easier to dehumanize the experience when what we're reading about is numbers. But when you're looking at someone's face and you know that they don't know where their babies are going to sleep tonight, it has a whole nother impact. And I couldn't change. There was nothing I could do in that moment that could change where my kids and I were landing, or how the lack of renter protections were for us in that moment. But I could stand up and hopefully put a voice out there to help change whether that is going to happen to my children, because as they are, now 18 and 20 and will be going into the rental market as vulnerable young adults, that was really what was driving me. Was I want things to be better for them. I want them to be more protective and not be impacted in their adult lives from predatory landlord practices as impacted in their adult lives as they have been in their youth, by these sort of practices that really just aren't right. So that was my experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's it's just so it just makes it so blaringly obvious that it is well past time. How can people even be wondering why we have a housing and homelessness crisis? Hearing your story and recognizing that that is not just happening to you, but to thousands and thousands of people for many, many, many years. So I just want to thank you for reliving that and sharing that with all of us, to help us have a better understanding. And I recognize the emotional labor of that, and I just want to thank you. So.